The gospel covers all facets of life, both temporal and spiritual. At the time of the restoration of the gospel, America was still a new country and fairly rooted in the self-reliant or societal principles of the gospel of Jesus Christ as found in the Bible, thanks in large part to the Pilgrims and Puritans for living those biblical principles and incorporating them into society so they could be passed down through the generations by pastors and ministers in the family. So with this understanding, it's a working theory that with the temporal principles intact as they were back then, and with a prophet now back upon the earth, it allowed the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to focus more on the spiritual principles which needed to be restored and taught, while letting the home and society take care of the temporal principles. Now, the temporal principles were never abandoned. Understand, these principles are peppered throughout the Scriptures and general conference addresses. So, if a person were to diligently read and study these sources on a regular basis, they would glean these principles by and by, and, if applied, avoid many of the pitfalls in life. But as for group teaching, it was focused more on the spiritual because that is where knowledge of the plan of salvation is, which among many things included the covenants and ordinances that bind our families together and bind us to God, and they needed restoring. But history shows the pattern. People prosper, get busy, get lax, and forget how they got there. The adversary finds new ways of making his philosophies appealing to new generations coming up. People deviate. One by one, homes fall apart for various reasons: divorce, depression, debt, addictions, just to name a few. And it continues until it begins to affect the whole of society. For the members of the church, in many ways we're no different. We're just as heavily influenced by the world like everyone else. Case in point, if we define these spiritual and temporal areas a little more, they look like this. This is a sample of the spiritual components, and here the self-reliant components. We could even derive a third category from these two, called the conduct category, since these principles are in both of them. Now, with the gospel principles categorized, it's easier to see that in these two categories, members of the church are fairly uniform, but in the self-reliant category, we're kind of all over the board. Is this how we envision the millennium to be? This is an example of being influenced by the world. We are ecclesiastically in line with the Lord, but temporally more in line with the world. These days, while referencing the temporal principles of the gospel, the members seem confused. Some think temporal means temporary, and therefore not that important, so they ignore it. Just get by, they think, because it will all be given to us in the next life. Others think temporal means worldly, so they shy away from it. But ironically, they eventually become worldly because they've closed themselves off to the Lord's principles. And if they have achieved much and are comfortable where they are, they show little interest in learning more and become unteachable. They mistake their comfortability for compliance with the Lord's standards, and at best view these principles as a great thing for someone else. In each case, their misunderstanding keeps them from the blessings the Lord wants them to have, which are also the blessings they really want. And if prolonged, it will cause them to go backwards, which will also affect their posterity. And then there are those that know they need help and are seeking it, but they just don't know where to find it. These examples are causing this great imbalance among the members. So in response to all of this, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has been adjusting its focus to bring the temporal principles more to the forefront alongside the spiritual principles. This process began several decades ago when the Church began to gather these principles from the ancient prophets as contained in the Scriptures and modern-day prophets as contained in the General Conference addresses, as well as other pertinent sources, and began compiling them into a series of manuals. Once compiled, these manuals would be neatly stored on the shelves of the distribution centers for those who were interested. This curriculum is designed to be taught in a classroom setting because that's what we've always done. So, consequently, unless there was a class offered, which was probably rare, these principles would remain on the shelves, mostly unseen and unlearned. But this would be a start. From the ancient prophets as contained in the Scriptures, along with the modern-day prophets, we now have manuals that not only cover the spiritual and conduct categories, but now also the temporal ones. And whereas we teach these every week during Sunday block time, these are not. and the challenge now is to find ways of getting these principles to become common knowledge again among our people. And this will be discussed in more detail in the next video.